Taking an epic ride on a motorcycle isn't the anomaly it once was. At times, it seems as if everyone and anyone who can reach the kickstand is off to the end of the earth. But Lois Pryce, our guest this week, is different. While the carrot topped Londoner can spin a funny or a harrowing tale as well as anyone, it's her observational acuity and writing capability that elevate her far above most globetrotters. But before we dive in, a word from our sponsor. Picture this: you're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything: brake rotors, lights, and tire exhaust systems, whatever you need, and it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love. Shall we take the plunge? Lois, we have to start at the beginning. And because it's hanging on the wall, I have to tell you my one and only banjo joke. Can I tell you that? Can we start off that way?
Of course, I'm used to banjo jokes.
Okay, so it's from the New Yorker. So there's two men in an elevator. In the elevator, they're stuck between floors. And the one man who is on the phone, it's calling someone to say, listen, I'm stuck. And and the second man pulls out a banjo, and the man on the phone says, "Wait, it gets worse." I'm sorry. Actually, I love bluegrass music. I do love. I have a lot of friends who are bluegrass players. And how did you develop a love for bluegrass music? And obviously, you play the banjo.
Yeah, it is unusual. I've always loved American music. From when I was a teenager, and that was my kind of obsession. So I was a big record collector. I worked in record shops and then the music industry in my 20s. But it was always kind of country, rockabilly, sort of that West Coast 60s stuff as well, country rock, southern rock, all of that. And so I was always delving back and back in time, and then you eventually get to bluegrass and old time Appalachian music. And I just, like any banjo nut will tell you, the first time you hear it, it grabs you and you're like, I have to do that. And I worked in a music shop, like a guitar shop at the time, and it was late 80s or early 90s, and it was everyone was playing Guns N' Roses or whatever, and I wanted to get my hands on the only banjo in the shop, and I bought it on hire purchase, and I've never stopped, really. Yeah.
So you're more Graham Parsons than
I'm so Graham Parsons. Yeah, absolutely.
Gotta love Graham Parsons. I was listening to Hickory Wind the other night.
Oh, it's magical.
It's a perfect song,
and I could tilt my camera and show you my Keith corner in the corner of this room, which is my little shrine to Keith Richards. He's my spirit animal,
Well, it's one of my favorite Keith Richards quotes, and it's not a direct quote, but it's somebody was asking him, why didn't he play more guitar solos? And he said, solos come and go, but riffs are forever.
Exactly.
Which I thought was perfect. Well, since this is a motorcycling site, I guess we should talk about something related to motorcycling and specifically to travel. Mm-hmm. And you've got such an incredible repertoire of trips that you've gone on. I hardly know where to start. Let's start off with that first trip of yours, which ended in the book Lois and the Loose. First of all, can you tell me where you went and then what sort of precipitated that first trip?
Yes, certainly. So the first trip was from Alaska down to the very tip of South America, so to Tierra del Fuego. And I was 30 when I did that trip. So it was a kind of, it's not quite, it's a bit young for a midlife crisis, but some sort of, I don't know, is there a late 20s crisis that people have? And you've sort of worked in a boring office for long enough to know that you don't want to do that. And then start thinking, well, what else can I do? So that was my situation. And I'd worked in the music industry for a while, and I was working at the BBC at their record company, essentially. So we were kind of releasing music from BBC programs on CDs, as it was in those days. And it was fine. It was quite fun, interesting, but there were also some rather dreary aspects of the job. And you're still essentially just working for a corporation, which means trudging into an office every day. And I knew that I couldn't keep doing that. And I just learned to ride a motorcycle purely for fun, just thought it looked like a fun thing to do. I'd been attracted by the vintage bikes, British vintage bikes. Really, that was because I was into all this kind of old music and fashion and everything from the 50s and 60s. So the obvious next step from that is into the motorcycles. And so I loved all the BSAs, the Triumphs. So I got myself a BSA, had a couple of BSAs. But as soon as I passed my motorcycle test, I had this light bulb moment of, the kind of combination, like boring job plus brand new motorcycle licenses, like instant answer is, oh, hit the road. That's kind of what I've been waiting for, because I'd worked since I left school, really, and all my friends had gap years and gone backpacking in Thailand. I never really fancied any of that. I knew I have to have my own wheels. So I've been working and sort of starting to feel like I needed to do something different. So that was the moment, really. But of course, I was the owner of a BSA, which is like the most unhelpful motorcycle to do. Anything.
As a former Norton owner, I understand your pain. I'm sorry.
Exactly. So you spend most of your time like pushing it or kicking it or stopping and going back to pick up all the bolts and nuts and whatever that fallen off along the road. So that was kind of my motorcycling experience. Just razzing around London really on it. So I'd never been anywhere, never been out of the country on it. But I suddenly knew that I had to do some sort of mammoth motorcycle trip. I didn't know anything about it at all. Like, I didn't know anyone that had done this kind of thing. I went to a bookshop and looked for books about these things, and there wasn't much in those days. This was 2002. But I did find the Adventure Motorcycling Handbook by Chris Scott, which is kind of the Bible, as it was then. I think it still is the Bible, should be the Bible. It's always the Bible to me. So I read that, and it really just transformed my world. And it was so exciting to read it, because I just had this feeling, well, if these people can do it, I can do it too. And that was it, really, because this was early days of, there's no social media, obviously, and there weren't really any websites or blogs about it. I think Horizons Unlimited existed then, but it was still kind of quite early days of the internet. So I handed in my notice, and I sold my BSA, and I bought a Yamaha XT225. So what is known as a Yamaha Sero, very, very small trail bike, like the smallest trail bike you can find. I was quite short.
Well, they're dismissively referred to as sort of a play bike, aren't they? They're not even considered a serious motorcycle, are they?
Well, I think playing is a serious business, so you might dismiss the idea of play, but that sounds great to me.
Yeah, true enough.
So yes, I mean, even at those days, the serious big bike was still, considered to be like the Teneres or the Africa Twins. People did big trips on those. In Britain, there's quite a long culture, strong culture of adventure motorcycling. People going to North Africa and Sahara, Dakar, all that stuff, and that would always be on those sort of bikes, the Teneres and the Africa Twins. But they were just like way too big and heavy for me. And I knew I wanted something light and easy and that I could pick up, because I was going to be on my own. So I needed to be able to pick it up by myself. And then people would, the way that people like to come in with unsolicited advice, would suggest that I get a BMW F650, but I couldn't bring myself to ride a BMW. So I stayed with the little Yamaha trail bike. And it was secondhand when I got it, so I had about 9,000 miles on it, and I just got some old bicycle panniers off my bicycle, and attached them somehow, and some army surplus bags and stuff, and just sort of stuck them all over it, and a jerry can, because it's got quite a small tank, and that was it. I bundled it all in a crate, and took the bike to bits and put it with all the stuff, and sent it to Anchorage Airport.
I mean, for a trip of that magnitude, first of all, as a Brit, going to Alaska, first of all, is quite a trip in and of itself. But it sounds very sort of laissez-faire approach to such a. I mean, what was the total mileage on your trip?
All in all, it was 20,000 miles by the time I got, because I got to Tierra del Fuego. Of course, you have to go somewhere after that. So I went back up to Buenos Aires, and then I went home from there. So with all the kind of detours and noodling, it was 20,000.
Now you've written that you were sort of, it's not a direct quote, but blissfully naive, I think, would sort of Would that sort of sum up your mindset at that point at the beginning of the trip?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for naivety, because it's the naivety that creates the adventure, because you don't know what you're getting into, and then you're open to everything, and you never ever have that feeling again, because once you've done a big trip once, then you're never not naive enough to have that experience in that open-eyed way again. So I actually relish the naivety. But of course, you can't be too much of an idiot about things. You do have to prepare your bike and make sure you've got enough money and you've got visas and you know how to, do basic maintenance and stuff like that. So I kind of took care of all that. I have a secret, sensible core, but I also like to leave a certain amount to fate, shall we say. So it's like finding that balance between like preparation and just letting the world happen to you.
When you arrived in Alaska, which is, and I've been there, and it's it's such a different landscape than even us in the South, or than you would have been familiar with, given your history coming from the UK. But when you started off, those first couple of days or the first hour, I mean, what was that experience like? Just, was there a moment of like, my God, what have I done? I mean, what was, take me through that.
Yeah, so it was interesting. So I flew into Anchorage Airport, and of course you're straight into kind of admin, aren't you, when you're doing like shipping? This is the stuff that people don't really talk about. It's not very glamorous, but you've got to get your bike out of customs, and I had to put the bike back together. So I did all of that, and then I remember my battery was flat, so I had to get a new battery and stuff. So it was a few days before I got going. It was still quite early in the season. It was like late April, so it was still deep snow plows on the road and roads closed and stuff. So I was, in this incredible environment, like you say, so different from anything in the UK. Just these huge mountains, everything covered in snow, and I was just thrilled. It was so exciting. And so when I remember, I've got a photo of like actually, the bike setting off, and I remember going to a like gas station to fill up the bike for the first time, and it's this like gnarly old Alaskan guy, all like long grey beard and dogs and like wild hair and dirty clothes and everything. And he looked at my British number plate and said, "Where the hell are you from?" And I said, "London, England." And he was just like, "What?" And he said, "Well, where are you going?" And I said, "Argentina." Didn't know idea what I was talking about. And I remember looking at his completely confused face and thinking, "Fuck yeah, I hear you, brother." So it was that, that amazing kind of midpoint between sort of anxiety and fear, because they're very close emotions, aren't they? But I was most of all thrilled and excited. I wanted nothing more than to be on that bike riding through this incredible world that I've never seen before. And I was, because I'd left this tedious office job, I remembered riding through these huge snow up to here, these channels in the snow, and just whooping and punching the air and like laughing out loud on my own, thinking, of all the people back in the office, and I was on a motorbike in the middle of Alaska with like no idea where I was going to go that night. I was going to camp out in the snow, or it was just so exciting. And I think you don't ever those first few days, you never get those back. You never get that again. However many trips you do, they're always exciting in a different way, but you never get that really like fresh thrill of that first, those first few miles. It's just brilliant.
Now, was this intended as a book from the get-go? I mean, was there a specific agenda that you wanted, or even beyond the book, was there something? You mentioned sort of a very early midlife crisis, but I think we're perpetually in crisis.
Constantly.
Yes, I think it's part of the human. Our brains are too big. That's our problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what were you first of all, about the book? Was there because it became a book, but was that intended in the beginning? And then beyond that, were there more sort of intangibles you were seeking, do you think?
No, there were no plans at all. And I think that was the whole point, actually. So, like I said, I'd been working all my life, and I was sort of used to living this very busy London life, rousing around the place, and every minute of my day being accounted for. And I really wanted to end that. I was sick of that. And I wanted a lot of open time ahead of me. And I wanted uncertainty. I wanted to not know what was going to happen. So the book was came about really just by an incredible series of well, just good luck, really. So I've always loved writing, and I did a bit of writing in my work. So I was working in record companies, and I would write like liner notes for albums and press releases and stuff like that. So I always enjoyed that aspect of it, and I'd always enjoyed it writing at school. But it never occurred to me that I could be a writer or be an author. It seemed that people that wrote books were kind of, superhero type people. So my brother, before I left, he is a techie person who, in those early days of the internet, was learning HTML. He's a software engineer and programmer, and he wanted to learn HTML. So he said to me, look, while you're away, I'll make a website about your trip, and I'll learn HTML by doing this. You post me your updates and pictures, and I will put them on this website. So I would kind of try and get to internet cafes, which was like, because obviously there's no kind of Wi-Fi in those days where you could just like, or smartphones or anything. So I would, or if I was staying with somebody and they had internet, I would use their computer. But mostly it was internet cafes, which were ubiquitous everywhere then. And I would just send an email out to him and my mum and my friends, every week or so. This is what's been happening. And he would take that text, post it up as HTML, as a this is a kind of early blog. I don't think even the word blog existed in 2003. Or maybe not in the UK anyway. So he would do that, and then photographs. I was still using I'm not a Luddite, but I'm a late adopter, should we say? So I was still using like a 35mm film camera. So I had this Nikon FM2. So I was taking film and having it processed as I went along, and then I would post the pictures, the actual prints back. By phone. And then my brother, I mean, it seems mad, doesn't it? Like only 20 years ago or something, but he would then take these pictures and scan them, or Austin would scan them. He was working at the school. He would take you into this, the old school scanner, and somehow get these pictures up on the internet. I mean, it's all seemed quite amazing.
It sounds very Victorian, doesn't it?
It really does. It's insane. But it was amazing because photo processing obviously existed everywhere. I remember like in Guatemala City, and I'd get some photos with processing. I'd go and find the general post office and package it all up and airmail it over, and it would take weeks. But so that's what my brother's doing very kindly for me, and I called this website Lois on the Loose, and it was just kind of like a fun project for him and a way for my family and friends to kind of keep an eye on things. But then my brother said, I checked your stats. This was like when I was I'd only been on the road a few weeks maybe, so I was in North America still, probably California or something. He said, I'll check your stats, and you're getting like 2,000 hits a day. And it's, there was no culture of like linking or sharing or anything like that in those days. So I was thinking, well, that's pretty mad. And I was like, and then I was starting to get emails through the website from people like saying, oh, if you're ever in Kuala Lumpur, come and stay. I'm really enjoying your journey. All these like random people, which nowadays is quite normal, isn't it, in the world of travel, connecting with strangers and couch surfing, that kind of idea. And a lot of it was to do with the Horizons Unlimited forum, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with, which is kind of like the granddaddy of all motorcycle travel sites, and was set up by Grant and Susan Johnson, who were, really like ahead of their time with that kind of stuff. They were sort of creating adventure motorcycling social media before anybody even knew what those words meant. So I think I maybe was like, I was using that to kind of find out about things, and like we all do. And so people kind of following me there or contacting me on there. And the whole thing just completely snowballed. It was just incredible. And by the time I got to San Francisco, I stayed with some friends there. One of them was an author. She'd written a book, not travel or anything, something completely unrelated. But she had an agent. She had a literary agent. And she said, oh, I've been reading your website. I think my agent would really like this, and you could turn it into a book. So she put me in touch with her agent in New York. Had a chat with her. She read some of the entries that I'd written. She said, yeah, do the rest of the trip. And then contact me when you get back to London. And that's basically how it happened. So when I got home, 10 months later or whatever, I got in touch and we wrote a proposal, and she sent it out and got me a book deal. And like, that was it. It wasn't as easy as that, got loads of rejections along the way, of course, but as all authors do. But that's how my writing career started.
For our seventh inning stretch, some thoughts provided by our sponsor. Picture this: you're in the garage, your favorite room in the house, and you're tuning up your engine with parts you found on eBay. Every piece is just locking perfectly into place. You step back to admire your work, hands covered in grease. And because you're committed to riding that thing further than the odometer can even handle, you start thinking to yourself, you know what? I could probably also use some new brakes, maybe a shock. This baby deserves a new air filter. So you head back to eBay. You can find any part you need there. It's unreal. From headlights to air filters to exhaust systems, all the way to those carbon fiber rims you've had in your mind. eBay is the stocked garage of your dreams. And you've got eBay guaranteed fit because eBay knows DIY fixes can be major and mods are always intense. So you need to know those parts are guaranteed to fit every time. Before you dive in, wrench first. And on the off chance you order a part and it doesn't fit, send it back. Simple as that. You know what you love more than your bike itself, and that's riding it. You're serious when it comes to engine maintenance and locked in when you're headed into a build. And that's exactly why you start with eBay, minor fix or complete overhaul. You get what you want and get it back on the road. And you've got eBay guaranteed fit. So eBay created My Garage, where all you have to do is add your ride's info to get the exact parts that fit. When you see that green check, you're a click away from that part clicking perfectly into place. So now that you know all that, imagine standing at the open garage door looking at the bike you love more than anything, knowing that anything is possible, whether it's keeping it on the road forever or turning it into something that's never been on the road before. Because with eBay, your garage just got a whole lot bigger. Get all the parts you need at prices you'll love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love. Now back to my conversation with Lois. The Lowdown Show is presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. When I spoke to your husband, Austin Vince, who's on an earlier version of the podcast, earlier episode of the podcast, I should say, one of the things that he said that I thought was interesting, which is in your travel time frame fits this as well, which is that he was glad that his early trips didn't intersect with so much technology of Instagram accounts. That the trips that so many of these trips, and because traveling around the world or these long distance trips, seemingly everyone is doing it, or many are doing it. That he was very thankful for sort of the isolation of not having constant contact. And that's changed. Now you've done successive trips, which we'll talk about in a moment, but looking back at that first trip and how relatively isolated you were compared to the way we communicate today, are you thankful that it was like that?
I am thankful, yeah, because I'm not, like I said, I'm not a massive kind of fan of technology, and I love the human contact. For me, that's the appeal of these trips, is meeting people that you would never normally meet. So I think that was just more common and more natural in those days. I mean, like I said, it was early days of the internet, so I could send emails, but there was certainly no checking your phone or, getting on social media or any of that stuff. So it was kind of like a good sort of stage to be at with that stuff. But yeah, I don't use a GPS, so I use maps. Even in my more recent trips, I've never used a sat nav because I like maps, and I'm kind of low tech generally, and I like talking to people and asking directions because that's like where like some crazy shit happens. You get to talk to somebody and then they say, hey, I'll show you the way, and then before you know it, you're following them across wherever and you're being invited to their house for a party or to meet their mum or something, which, if you're following a dot on a little screen, that never happens. You turn up at your destination, which is like ideal in some ways, but it's all this fun stuff that happens along the way and the unknown stuff that makes the journey, really. So if you said, oh, I'm going to go on a journey, I'm going to follow sat nav and book my hotel in advance every night and use my sat nav to get to that hotel, sure, you would ride your motorcycle through these countries and have that experience, but that isn't really what it's about. That's kind of the most boring part of it. It's like the sitting on the bike. It's all the stuff that happens in between, and it's usually the stuff that involves other humans that makes it interesting. So that's what I'm always seeking out. So I am glad. I mean, Austin's trip was even before mine. He was mid-90s, so there was no emails or internet at all. I know he told me that if they got the group got split up, he had to write messages in chalk on the road, like "we've turned right here," you know. So we're both quite analog in that sense, and we continue to be quite analog in our lives, but using technology when it's useful, you know. But I'm really glad. The one thing I'm really, really glad of is that I didn't have this constant pressure to do post and to be constantly updating, you know, the public or whatever it might be, because I think that takes you out of the trip. And one of the nice things about writing is that you spend your time on the bike thinking, composing your sentences and how you're going to describe something, and going over a conversation you've had and how you will tell that story. And so you have this really nice contemplation time and planning time, and then you can write it up in your own time in the evening. So you've got a project, which is quite nice. I get that. It's nice to, to tell your story in some way. I totally understand that. Of course I do. That need to communicate, definitely. But I like, that's what I like about writing, is that you sort of do it in your own head, in your own time, rather than this kind of constantly filming and then posting and then sort of responding to the comments. I would hate to do that.
There's not a lot of time for rumination or contemplation, I think, when you're perpetually
so it's
making content.
Yeah, like, what are you doing? Are you just creating content? Are you working? You know, that's the other thing. I was desperate to get out of work. I was like, I don't want to bloody work. You know, I've worked all my life. I just want to do, I don't want to ride a motorbike and, across the desert or in the mountains and lie in bed if I want to, or, sleep in in a ditch somewhere or something. It's like, I don't want to be like on this someone else's schedule, and that's why I never got into sponsorship either, because I was like, I don't want to take a photo of myself at Machu Picchu and make sure that someone's logo is showing, or make sure I mention that I'm using these particular tires or whatever. It's like I had to own everything. That trip was mine, and I wanted it to stay that way, and that was really important to me. And the same with really in regards to going on my own as well. It was a kind of like little mini bubble. If you think you're going to be alive for maybe hopefully 80 years or so, 70, 80 years, to get like a year of your life where you can do like whatever the hell you want is a pretty rare thing.
And one of the things you've said, which I thought was interesting, which is that you said that these trips are often viewed by those on the outside as sort of taking on the world, that you are going to conquer, like Hillary, on your trip, versus what you said, which is being in the world. It's a much more low key approach to travel. And can you sort of elaborate on the distinction in your mind between those two?
Yeah, I think human beings have a lot more in common than we realize. It's easy to think that we're all very different, coming from different cultures, and men and women in different countries and languages. It's easy to look at those differences, but actually when you meet people, you realize you all have the same sort of needs in life. And that's really one of the good sort of humbling lessons that you take from traveling, especially when you are in a vulnerable situation. And on a motorcycle, you sort of essentially are always in a vulnerable situation. You're exposed literally to the elements, to the outside world, to anyone who wants to come up and grab you. So you're very exposed. And if you're alone, then obviously even more so. So you have to trust in the people that you encounter along the way. And really, my experience is that most of the time that is absolutely fine. And it's not just fine, it's a delight. And that people are interested and interesting, and they want to help you. And I think it's a natural human instinct. If you see somebody in your country who's obviously a stranger and alone and traveling through like that, my instinct would always be, oh, I hope they're okay, I hope they're having a good time, do they need any help? And that's what I encountered with most people. And sometimes it's just curiosity or intrigue, but there's enormous amounts of generosity. And this just, I think, this human need to connect with other people and to understand their lives, and that was just a constant experience through all of my journeys, really. I mean, obviously, like, I've probably had a few difficult moments, like most people have, but most of the time It's that, and I think you only really get that if you go out there with a certain approach, which is just being open to whatever happens. So not sort of judging the situations and not expecting anything, just seeing what happens and going with the flow. And it's hard, it's easier said than done, because of course it is an anxiety inducing thing to do. But I always find that I have a sort of 2 week bit at the beginning where I'm all like uptight and trying to control everything, you know, like
Right.
I make all my lists and like I want everything to be like this and everything has to go this way and I want to do that. And then I realize that's completely fruitless and I just drop that. And then I just allow the trip to happen to me rather than me trying to control the trip. And that's when it just becomes so much more rewarding. And I think people that you encounter respond to that openness. So it's not really, you might be conquering something within yourself. I think most people are that do this kind of thing because it is a challenge in some ways. But I don't feel the need to conquer anything else. It's more just sort of mingling around the world with my fellow human beings, seeing what's going on. That's the kind of approach that I take. And that extends also, I think, to the kind of bike that I ride and the clothes that I wear and having an open face helmet. I mean, it just transforms everything that if you can smile at somebody, just transforms the situation instantly.
Yes, and I think it's what you said about, and I saw that elsewhere that you said that and I've seen photographs, and your riding kit is decidedly low key, purposefully, because you don't want to appear as one of those, because that ADV riding equipment, as you know, is sort of like, looks like Desert Storm combat outfits with the helmets and goggles and the khakis and there's almost something almost sort of militaristic about some of the way riding gear can appear, but you wear jeans, boots, and an old bell staff, at least.
Yeah.
And further to that end, I suppose, right? To be more approachable. Further to the notion of being more approachable.
Exactly, and I think it does make a difference because I was in Morocco one time on my bike, and I was like wearing my normal clothes, and I remember seeing a bunch of motorcyclists coming in the market, like one of these big souks in Morocco. It's all like crazy and busy and fun and everything. And these guys came in. I don't know where they're from, but they were dressed in that type of typical kind of like ADV riding, off-road riding stuff, and big boots and all of the armor, and then carrying like motocross helmets and stuff. And they just stuck out so much that it would have been really hard for like a normal Moroccan person to kind of engage with them. They were just so distant from everyone else. And so I remember that image really clearly. And so I really tried to avoid that. So my goal is always that when I get off the bike, I can just go anywhere and look like I'm, basically just a normal person wearing normal clothes. And that's got a lot easier now because you can get like good jeans to wear on the bike and jackets that don't look so kind of motorcycle-ish. But yeah, that is like a big part of my approach to the trips.
My view is that motorcycles are probably the best way and simultaneously the worst way to travel. And if you're alone, it's even better. And of course, we all know the reasons why anyone watching this knows why motorcycles are bad, because you're hot and you're cold and you're wet and you're parched and you've got to wear this ridiculous thing over your head. And then when you're alone, and then, when you're alone, you're even more vulnerable because, groups of people, even if it's just two, you tend to interact with each other and not with the outside world. So the notion of being on a motorcycle, and the benefits, of course, are that you need other people, don't you? You need it seems like all of us as motorcyclists need help. And when you're alone, and I'm guessing that just really facilitated your ability to sort of move into the culture.
Yeah, you're right. It is a difficult way to travel. It's sort of purposely difficult almost, isn't it? And I suppose that's part of the appeal is that challenge of like, can I keep this machine running? Can I find the right temperature ever? Can I find the right clothes to wear?
Yeah. No, the answer is no.
No, never.
Never.
Are there any waterproof clothing that is actually waterproof? No. So yeah, all of this stuff. But I remember when I was in Africa, which is my second trip, I rode from London to Cape Town, and for a little while I travelled with a few people that I met who were in a Land Rover or Land Cruiser. And we would roll into a village, in the Sahara or somewhere, wherever we were in Africa, and everyone would come piling out, of course, because it's intriguing, foreigners turning up in these places. And they would be boxed off, like these other travelers, they're Belgian, they would be boxed off in their car with all these, people banging on, hey, hello, want to buy this, or can I touch this, and I would be like mobbed on my bike, and people would be like, beeping the horn on my bike, or pulling at the sheepskin on my saddle, or like revving the revs or whatever. And so, and I was so aware of that difference between the two experiences. And that sums it up really. So yeah, you get all the cold and the wet and the rain, but I've had butterflies landing on my face while I've been riding through the jungle. You just don't get that if you're driving a Land Cruiser. So I think it's like that thing of the highs and lows. If if the lows are low, then the highs are really high. So
and of course, you need the lows for the highs to exist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't, there's no such thing as a kind of solo adventure in a sense, because you are always dependent on people somewhere or another.
Now you wrote that on your first trip that you packed, fear was the motivating factor in how you packed, because I'm always fascinated by people who do big trips about how they pack and what they put in, and some have this this incredibly regimented notion of everything, and what is packing for fear? What does that mean?
Well, before I left, I would read, like I say, I'd read the Adventure Motorcycling Handbook, or read stuff on Horizons Unlimited, and if you've got an active imagination, you imagine all the things that could possibly go wrong. So you think, well, I might get a puncture, which seems, that's a reasonable thing to consider. So I'll need puncture repair kit. So I'll need a pump. So I bought a little electric pump. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, you wake up and think, but what if the electric pump breaks? Oh, well, I better bring a hand pump as well. So then you pack for the next, you're kind of packing for fear, and then you're packing for a new fear that the things you pack are going to break, and it's like endless fear packing going on and on. So I ended up with that kind of idea of like just kind of, I don't know, anticipating. Maybe that might be a better way to put it, like packing for anticipation, but anticipating all the things that could possibly go wrong, which of course is endless. Like all sorts of things could go wrong. You don't know what they are either. So you bring spares because you think, well, that might wear out or that might break. And then of course the one thing you didn't bring is the thing that breaks. So it's sort of like a pointless exercise really. But when you've never done this before, it's easy to be sucked into that. And that's kind of what the whole insurance industry sort of survives on, isn't it? Like making people worry about things that might go wrong. Like, is your washing machine going to break? Is your pet going to get ill? Is your holiday going to go? Is your flight going to get cancelled? Well, you can insure for all of those things. You can insure for everything, and there's loads of people making a lot of money out of that. But you're just like living there in fear. And I realised after a few weeks of that was like not the way to conduct a trip or conduct life at all, actually. And so I got rid of loads of stuff. I think most people do that. Like they start with enormous amounts of stuff, and then you have like a month on the road where it's driving you mad and you can't find anything in your panniers, and and you lay it all out on the floor and you get rid of most of it. Because the other thing that I suppose it sounds silly really, but I didn't really realise is, of course, that most of the things you need you can get in the countries that you're going to. Right. Because all you're doing is what most people do is riding a vehicle and washing your hair. You get shampoo and spanners or whatever, and engine oil everywhere in the world, because everyone needs to do those things. And
now you also wrote that, sort of jump in here, but you also wrote that and maybe this is related to this, but that stuff gets in the way of real experience, that you had this, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had this sort of epiphany at some point that the more that you shed, the freer and more open you were. Is that true?
I think so, yes, because if you have loads of stuff, I mean, it's true in life, but certainly on motorcycle trips, you're always thinking about it. And that's part of the reason that I don't carry any electronics. I'll never take a laptop or an iPad or anything like that. I didn't even take a phone. I did take a phone on one trip, but that was in Iran and I couldn't use it anyway, because you can't use your phone in Iran. It was just to take photos. But the more stuff you've got, you're constantly worrying about, is it going to get nicked, stolen, broken, lost? So if you can just have things that you don't mind getting stolen, broken, or lost, then you suddenly like removed a whole load of stress from your journey. And so I would only ever, I carry books to read, you know, that's my kind of weakness. So my panniers are too heavy because I've got too many books, and a diary that I wrote in and a camera. So the camera is probably the most valuable thing really. But that's it. Everything else could be, could just, you know, it's dispensable and could be replaced in, you know, most countries really. So I think, and as I've looked at, you know, if you look at pictures on my bike from my 3 main trips, which is like the Americas, then Africa, then Iran, it gets smaller. The bags get smaller and smaller each time.
Right.
Because you stop with the worrying really, and all of that stuff is just a kind of symptom of worry.
Now, one thing that I think that, you know, the way that the political systems are going in the world, there is a real fear of the other. I think, and politicians is the way they do. They, you know, they want to divide us into groups. But I think that any one of us who travels, and you've traveled a lot more extensively than I have, but you must have I'm guessing, a very different view of sort of humanity. And, you know, there's so, in the midst of a U.S. election a week away, and so much of it is driven by fear of the other, fear of the Mexicans. They're not fearful of us Canadians, which kind of makes me feel a little
Everyone loves the
wimpy.
Canadians.
Can't they? Why can't we invoke fear?
You want to be
But
scary.
I want to be scary. But you've seen, and we'll sort of start. We'll get into this conversation about your ride through the revolutionary ride, your most recent book, through Iran. I mean, that your whole notion of human beings and how we relate to each other must have been totally upended by these trips. Because I think at one point, you know, you said that you considered yourself worldly and well-traveled, and I think this is so true, but, you know, there are negative sentiments about other people that I think all of us carry. And yet, just tell me about when you see sort of, you know, governments and the government and political machinations, and yet, you know, humanity in such a different level.
It's really distressing actually, because the reality is that the people and governments are 2 completely separate entities. I mean, of course, you know, we know that about our own countries, don't we? Look at our leaders and think, God, you know, nothing, they don't represent me. I would, you know, certainly when Boris Johnson was our Prime Minister, or whatever, I'd be horrified if someone thought they were coming to England. We were all like that, you know. So we know that in reality, but we somehow still apply that to other countries. So yeah, when I went to Iran, I think I did still, even though, like I said, I thought, well, I've traveled a lot and I know that, you know, people are friendly the world over, and things are what they seem. You know, I'd been to Colombia and El Salvador, and of course to Africa, like the Congo, Angola, all these places that were supposedly dangerous. But you know, these negative ideas are drip fed into us from the minute we're born, almost. So Iran and Britain, for example, have had a very tumultuous relationship for 100+ years. I'm not saying that I knew about that, but if somehow it sort of seeped into my psyche as a British person that Iran was to be feared or not trusted or whatever, or just different, you know, as if that was a bad thing. And so it was almost like I didn't even really quite realize how much that is drip fed until I sort of went there. But then you've got to get over that feeling to kind of feel that you can go and check it out for yourself anyway. So that Iran really, it's a sort of recalibrated my entire persona and my entire psyche. I mean, it really made me rethink everything and realize just how much we are misled, and how, like you say, politicians and world leaders are really dangerous in this kind of taking this angle. And if only they could just get on a motorbike and ride around Iran, they might feel very differently about things and have different policies. So really, you know, I do believe that actually, in a kind of soft diplomacy way, that there is a lot to be said for independent travel like this. But it does have to be independent. I think that's the key thing. It's sort of course, you still get a benefit from, say, going on an organised tour or a package holiday or something, but you're always getting fed a certain line at that point. And certainly, like somewhere like Iran, all of that stuff is very, very controlled. So you really do need to be completely vulnerable and open to the people, and that's kind of where you will reap the most rewards. And really, in Iran, that was just so true. I mean, it's just my favorite place I've ever been, and the people are just fantastic. And it's so different than what you might think if you just read the newspapers.
Do you ever get exasperated when, say, family members will say, "Oh my God, Iran! I can't believe you went there"? And I mean, I guess you would see how, as you said, this notion of being drip fed information from childhood. And yeah, I mean, when I think of Iran, I think of hot, dry, dangerous, barely make it out alive.
Yeah.
And I think I'm fairly progressive, but those are the things that sort of intuitively come to the fore.
Exactly. Because we have this image of like the Ayatollah Khomeini, so all of our lifetime, you're probably similar age to me. That's been the image of Iran, these terrifying mullahs and the awful thing they do. And this is a key thing, though. Those things are happening. This isn't. I'm not being some sort of, dreamy Pollyanna-ish. There definitely is bad stuff going on, and Iranians are having a terrible time. But this is the difference. The government is one thing, the Iranian people are the other, and the Iranian people don't want the life that they're forced to live under. They can't even wear what they want. They can't play music. They can't watch a film. Everything is controlled. Like every aspect of their life is controlled, and they're not like in wild support of their government either. I think that's the crucial thing. So yeah, I mean, it absolutely blew my mind. And talking to Iranians and hearing their stories and just being amongst them, just that was the motivating factor, actually. Like you're asking about, well, what do I get annoyed when people say, "Oh, Iran"? Yeah, because it's annoying that message is still like the strongest sort of image of Iran. But that's what made me want to write the book that I wrote, because I remember coming back from Iran and thinking, I have to do this justice. I'd written 2 books already, which are quite fun and all about the motorcycling and adventure, and it's about me. It's like I left my job and I did a quick fun thing, and I rode a motorbike here, and all these crazy things happened, blah blah blah. But I knew that the Iran book had to be different. I didn't want to keep writing the same book, and there's only so much you can say about a crazy border crossing and whatever. And I knew that I had to do justice really for Iran and the Iranian people that have been so good to me and so lovely. And everywhere I went, people would be like, "We're not terrorists. We're not terrorists." That was this mantra that people were coming out with all the time. They're very aware of how they're viewed in the world, and it really upsets them. And I sort of felt, well, I have to go and write a book, an accessible book that tells people, normal people, what Iran is actually like. Because I'm sure there's lots of scholarly works about Iran, but you don't read much about Iran that is maybe more accessible. And that was my plan. And it was easy to do because I love the place, and I couldn't say enough about how wonderful it was, and also expose how difficult it is for them.
Well, it does seem, just from reading excerpts, that there was a maturation of your writing versus the first 2 books. And as you said, you can only talk, if you want to develop as a creative person, you have to go beyond what you've done before. And the first books were really a bit more of beautifully written, but a bit more of, wow, this is what's happening, and here I am. But the Iran book, really, there was a beautiful sort of urgency, I thought, to it.
Good. Oh, I'm glad that you picked that up. Yeah, because it's difficult because you also, you're right. When you are as a creative person, you do have to progress and you do have to push yourself and try new things. And I think it's a mistake to kind of keep churning out the same thing all the time. But of course, there's always people like a band. Everyone likes the first album, and then they complain when they go off in a different direction, But there are people like who love the first book, and they're like, oh, well, now the Iran books are, it's different, but I hope it's still got some elements of humor and fun in it as well, because that's the other thing. Iranians are the most fun people you'll ever meet, and that's not a thing that anyone ever says about Iran.
The Lowdown Show is presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. Now, let's get a little less philosophical for a moment. And I hope you will give me this indulgence, and tell the story, because this is just every good trip has one of those oh shit, what am I doing moments. And you've had a number of them, but can you tell the getting off course story with the landmines? That's just such a gem of a piece, and your response to it, and this sort of, I don't know, epiphany of whatever that you were in. Anyway, I'll leave it to you. I'm telling you.
Yeah, no, it was a moment that will stay with me forever. So I was traveling in 2006. I rode from London to Cape Town, South Africa, and I took the West Coast route, which was the kind of unusual route at the time, because most people take the East Coast route, which is the kind of former British colonies. It's all paved roads. It's the easy one to get visas and everything. But I went through, after crossing the Sahara, I went over to the west side, and I went through the Congos and then into Angola. And Angola, so this would have been 2006, 7. Angola had just come out of a brutal 27-year-long civil war. And no tourists had been there for all this time, and it was absolutely wrecked. Dreadful state it was in. So everything was bombed, houses, half-bombed houses everywhere, people still living in them, abandoned tanks by the side of the road, craters everywhere, just like a proper war zone, really. So I was riding through there, and this coincided with the worst flooding that Angola had in like 20 years or something.
Nice timing.
So yeah, exactly.
Well done.
So it was like, oh my God, this terrible roads and this country that is on its knees, really, and there's no road signs or anything. So, and I was in this kind of high plateau area, sort of slightly forested, and riding on this really terrible road, muddy potholes, and I got to this junction and had my map, which is a terrible map, because this is the thing, with countries like this that have sort of been off the radar for a long time, the mapping is really old-fashioned as well. So I had this really bad map in the middle of this forest with all these tracks everywhere, mud everywhere, pouring rain, thunderstorms going on, lightning. I thought, oh God, and this fork in the road. And I remember thinking, I don't know which way it goes. They look the same. And the map wasn't clear. I didn't show a fork at all. So I was really like, if you look at my compass, I couldn't work it out. I was trying to get to a town to stay like a couple of hours away. So I was sort of there, drenched, as usual, and thinking, okay, well, I have to choose one of them. And the fork to the left had all these posts along it, like white concrete posts marked along it. I thought, oh, that looks kind of like official somehow, and also it had bits of old tarmac, asphalt, broken up. So it's like, oh, that must be the road. It's just in a really bad state, and those posts must be like markers or something. And because it was so heavy rain and just terrible conditions, I thought, okay, well, I'll just follow that one. So I was chugging along there, bashing over all these potholes. I was riding a Yamaha, another Yamaha this time with the TTR 250. So it's a pretty good off-road bike. And I was smashing around over all these potholes, and I passed one of these markers, these like concrete markers. There's a post like maybe a foot high, and I noticed it had some writing on it. I thought, oh great, maybe that's telling me how long it is to the town, how far it is to the town. So I stopped the bike and pointed my headlight on it and peered closer, and was horrified to be met with a picture of a skull and crossbones and the words "danger, mines." Because so Angola is known, well known for being one of the most mined countries in the world. It's like Princess Diana went there to kind of meet landmine victims. There's this kind of like, that's kind of what it's known for more than anything, probably. So the whole place is covered in mines, and I knew that. And I also knew that I had to be really careful in Angola to stay in the middle of roads, because the landmines are often on the verges. So where you might normally just pull over, for a break on the verge of a road, you couldn't do that, So I was always like stopping to do everything right in the middle of the road. Everything, that is. Anyway.
As if motorcycling isn't dangerous enough.
Yeah,
you have to stop in the middle of the road.
It's right. Like, you need the loo, middle of the road. You want to eat a banana, middle of the road. And the truck's coming along, and you're like, oh God. Anyway, so that was my experience. I was really, really wary about like sides of the road, because I knew that the mines were all along there. So anyway, I was staring at this bloody post, thinking, shit, not those posts weren't saying come this way, this is the road. They were saying, don't come this way, this is a minefield. So by this point, I'd ridden about, I don't know, like 500 meters or something. And so I think, fuck, I'm stuck in the middle of the minefield with this torrential rain, like massive thunderstorm going on. All my tyre tracks had been washed away because I was obviously thought, well, I'll turn around and go back to the junction and take the other route. But all my tyre tracks had been washed away. So I thought if I could stick to the tyre tracks, I'd be fine because obviously I've made it this far and I'll stay exactly in them and then I'll be fine going back. But they'd all gone. So I was like, now I'm stuck in the middle of a minefield. Nobody knows where I am. I don't have a phone in those days. It's like, well, I've got two choices. Either I ride back for 500 meters and just hope that my legs don't get blown off, or I just sit here for the rest of my life until I die. That was it. That was the choice. So I knew I had to give it a go. So I rode back, just screaming my head off, like thinking, if I veer 1 inch the wrong way, that's it. I'm either dead or I lose a limb or whatever. So, which many of Angolans have done. So it's a real danger. Anyway, obviously I made it back to the junction, but by the time I got back there, I was kind of like a absolute hysterical mess. I was like, oh yeah, I just been doing my floor, and I sort of freaking out. And just then I heard this putter 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 of a motorbike engine. And I couldn't believe it because I was in a really remote area. I hadn't seen a single human all day. And I looked around and this guy was riding towards me on this little 125cc motorbike. And he's a local guy. And he was staring at me, amazed to see me. And I was amazed to see him. And I was so happy to see another human. I was like, help, where am I going? I'm lost. And I'm just really being a complete idiot. And he just was so cool and laid back. He was just laughing. And he was totally immaculate. And he had the cleanest white sneakers on and beautiful clean clothes in the middle of this mad mud forest landmine nightmare. And he was like, where are you from? And I said, London, England. And he was like, oh yeah, riding to Cape Town. Yeah. It's like, bam, just instant humbling. He was so brilliant, his sardonic tone and expression, but it was quite sweet as well. He was laughing, but in a nice way, and totally brought me down to earth. And I realized, this for me, this is a great adventure, and for him, it's just his commute to work. And then he said, okay, don't worry, follow me. I know where to go. I know exactly the right spot. And so by this point, the road had turned into a river. I mean, like a gushing river with huge rocks in it and everything. So, and he was all over it on this really just crappy little road bike, really nimble, lifting up his sneakers so they didn't get dirty, doing all these moves. And I was trying to keep up with him, following along. And he led me out of the whole thing and took me to this town and found a hotel. And it was just an amazing experience of.
Sometimes there's a criticism, as you know, about people who do epic journeys like you have, and it's sometimes the criticism is that it's almost some sort of disaster tourism in a way, that you're going through very poor countries. You are in a position in your life, even though in the West you it's not considered that we have money or you had money, but nevertheless you were able to leave a job, buy a motorcycle, and take this journey, and most people in the world would never do that. How do you square that off in your mind? And this, as you said, there's always someone bringing you down to earth, and you've also written about the necessity of losing one's ego, which is never bad in life, in any pursuit. But how do you square that in your mind? And did you ever have moments where you think, where it just didn't sit well with you?
Yeah, definitely. I'm quite sympathetic to that viewpoint, really, and I think it is good to be aware that this is incredible privilege to be able to do this, and that most people can't. And I think that's where you do have to lose your ego, and you do have to be really, really humble, and you do have to understand that you're always a guest in someone else's life, someone else's not just their country, but their actual life, every interaction you have with them, you have a responsibility, I think, to behave well and to kind of spread some good vibes, if you know, for want of a better expression, in its most simple form. And I think humility is at the heart of that, and that's why I sort of try to, you know, stay away from, like we were talking about before, the kind of, you know, turning it into a sort of big challenge thing or making out that it's really like amazing or difficult. It's not really, you know, riding a motorcycle isn't that hard. And, you know, it's, anybody can do this. And I suppose the way that I square it with myself is that I do believe that it can make you a better person by mingling with people that are different from you, and you can also bring some good to other people's lives if you behave appropriately. So that isn't like razzing through their town at like 60 miles an hour, or, you know, haggling over something that's like dirt cheap to you anyway. These are the things that I think, like, that I, you know, I don't like, and that you do, that you can avoid doing. And just be really respectful and realize like how your presence is viewed in other people's worlds. Because when you do travel, especially if you stay away from the touristy places, people are genuinely interested and pleased to see you. And as long as you then respect them and make sure that they understand that you're respecting their life, then it's like it's just a coming together in its ideal form. It's a coming together of two human beings saying, hey, you know, how's it going? And that is the kind of what you're trying to achieve, or what I'm always trying to achieve. But you, of course, you're aware, and I'm super aware of how fortunate I am. And also, as a woman, you know, women wouldn't have been able to do this like 100 years ago, even in Britain. You know, wouldn't have been possible, really. So I'm very aware that I was born into the right time, born into the right country, to allow me to have these experiences. And so I think if you go out, tread lightly and be aware of that as you are doing all of your interactions, that's kind of as much as you can do, really. And then I think if you do write about it or make films about it or spread the word somehow, I think there's a sort of responsibility to do that, to try and make people understand that the world is not a scary place.
Lois, would you be so kind as to read an excerpt from Revolutionary Ride for us, please?
I'd be delighted. Yes, here it is. I'm going to read a bit from the early part of the trip. So I'd only just arrived in Iran, and I was riding through the Alborz Mountains, which are in the north part of Iran. And I was still sort of quite anxious and a little bit wary about sort of how I was going to be perceived as a British woman riding a motorcycle in Iran, because Iranian women aren't allowed to ride motorcycles in Iran. So it's very much a kind of novelty, shall we say. And you know, obviously all of the kind of security concerns that you would expect. So I was riding through these mountains, I was looking for somewhere to stay, and I heard that there was a hotel up this road or something. And the road was very dark, very empty. And then I noticed that I was being tailed, essentially. So there was two cars following me, and every time I stopped, they stopped. And every time I started again, they started again, and they just stayed behind me the whole time. So I was getting really nervous. Thinking that, you know, I don't know, that the security services had been ticked off and they were going to come and get me. So that is the setting that we come into the story. The evening was not working out as planned. I'd hoped to be tucked up in the cosy village of Gazakhan by now, but instead I was still on the road with night falling and no idea where I'd be sleeping that night. I was tired, cold, and now, with the appearance of these cars, a little unnerved. I decided to keep going, not giving the cars a second glance as I accelerated past them as fast as I dared, trying to make a confident "don't mess with me" swerve as I took the next corner a bit too fast for comfort. The road behind me remained dark for a few minutes, but sure enough, within a few hundred yards, the headlights appeared again as they continued their tale. I was painfully aware of my bright yellow British number plate with its alien Roman letters and numerals, acting like a beacon. I'm a stranger around here. I could see this cat and mouse game going on all night, or at least until us ran out of petrol. And if it was me, then what? Everything seems more intimidating and sinister in the dark, and I tried to not let my paranoia overtake me, reminding myself that people were forever stopping and staring at me in Iran with no malice or ill intent. They were simply curious. I also told myself that drivers stop at the roadside for all sorts of mundane reasons. Maybe one of them just needed the loo, or they needed to check the map. It was hard to keep up a good speed on the dark, winding road, littered as it was with potholes and fallen rocks. But despite my decreasing pace, the cars remained behind me in what was obviously a steady but deliberate pursuit. As darkness fell and the black of the mountains merged with the night sky, I pressed on. Then, amidst all this dark, ghostly wilderness, my headlight beamed on a big, neatly printed sign at the side of the road. The words couldn't have been more welcome. The Hotel Alborz, 17 kilometres away. For a moment, I wondered if I was hallucinating a modern traveller's version of the famous Iranian paradise. But forget the exotic flower gardens with their fair maidens. This was my fantasy, a comfy bed and a cup of tea. But no, this was no mirage. The sign was right there, real and solid in front of my weary eyes. 17 kilometres, roughly 10 miles. I did the now well-practiced kilometres to miles conversion in my head and checked my trip meter, watching the numbers turn slowly with every revolution of the wheels. Come on! I willed us into the night, fired up with the knowledge of a refuge ahead and hoping that I would shake off my chase vehicles when I pulled into the welcoming civility of the hotel car park. The cars tailed me all the way. My trip meter rolled slowly through the digits, but when the estimated 17 kilometres arrived, there was no hotel to be seen. The road remained as empty and inhospitable as ever. There were no lights ahead, and it was hard to imagine any kind of building cropping up in a place like this. 11 miles, 12, 14, still no sign of any human habitation, and still the cars tailed me. Then, on a straight stretch, I saw signs of life in the distance on the left-hand side of the road. Lights ahead, a building of some kind. My heart leapt with joy and relief. This must be it, at last. But as I approached, I could see it was just a lonely house with no sign or car park or any other welcoming features of a hostelry. The cars remained behind, still close. The road darkened again. All I could do was keep moving on into the night, my body tense with apprehension. 5 more miles and I was beginning to give up hope when I came around a bend to see a 3-story building built into the mountainside. It had lights and a carport at the front, and yes, thank heavens, a sign outside, the Hotel Alborz, at last. I didn't use my indicators, not wanting to reveal my intent. So with a quick glance over my shoulder, I swung a sharp left across the road into the car park, only to hear the crunch of tyres on gravel behind me as my pursuers made the exact same manoeuvre. The car doors flew open and 8 people bundled out, loud voices speaking fast and now approaching me where I'd stopped, still astride my bike, trying to assess the situation that was unfolding. Who were these mysterious night travellers? One of them came lumbering towards me, a big mustachioed figure with wild, messy hair, and I realised I was cornered. I offered a salam in a voice more confident than I felt. And then I saw the glint of metal in his right hand as he raised it in my direction.
Pryce's 3 books, Lois and the Loose, Red Tape and White Knuckles, and Revolutionary Ride, remain in print. Scoop 'em up. In closing, a word from our sponsor. Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY motorcycle fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. But it's okay because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything. Brake rotors, lights, entire exhaust systems, whatever you need, and it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.